First of all, thank you very much for your hospitality. I had three sets of different questions I wrote you by email. The first series of questions would concern maybe the main characteristics that you would see from the Solvay Institute, the Solvay conferences. What's the most salient dimension in this kind of conference that you wouldn't find in other kind of conference in physics?
Well, so you know, I began working with Mark on the revival of these conferences, and it was now, I guess, almost 13, over 12, a dozen years ago.
Mm-hmm.
It's really, I guess, like 2004, and we tried to revive the spirit of the Solvay conferences as they exist in the beginning, and I think we actually even improved slightly on the organization, although it was much easier when physics was a smaller group of people than it is now, and there weren't so many conferences. But the features that we appreciated, or that we thought were important and tried to reproduce, were one, sort of the, well, most important was the free nature of the conferences. You know, most conferences, people give talks, 5 minutes of question, and often in bad conferences, most of the interesting stuff happens in the hallways. That wasn't, I mean, that always happens because people mix and it's an opportunity for people to get together. But Solvay conferences were special in the sense that they were closed, restricted, not public, and there was a lot of discussion where people got to the heart of very difficult problems and spoke freely, and that's what we tried to reproduce. Conferences where the organized talks, or the prepared talks, were less than half the time allotted. So there were general reviews, rapporteur talks, and then small contributions, and then lots of time for discussion. Historically, at the beginning, you know, the conferences attracted a few dozen people at most. So there were 30-ish people at the famous conferences, an incredible group of participating scientists. It was hard enough, it's hard enough today to limit the size to twice that number. Mm-hmm. And with twice that number, we tried to come up with innovative ways to sit around a table and talk, which is sort of what they did then. It's hard to do that with 60 people. We came up with a solution, actually, a topologically round table that can seat about 50. Just tables put in a circle with an empty spot in between, and TV screens in between, so that, not at eye level, but below, so that presentations and discussion can occur in a circle, so that everyone is equal and no one is talking to an audience. Because if you talk to an audience listens, asks questions. It's a dialogue between the speaker and the audience, and not a dialogue between 60 people or 50 people. So what we treasured was that feeling of equality, of spontaneity, of open discussion. We also preserved the notion of a exclusive elitist, if you want, but selected group that wasn't open either to journalists or to the public in any way. And of course, we kept the revolutionary achievement of the first Solvay conferences that they were totally international, and there was no preference given to Belgian physicists or European physicists. And the other thing is that the Solvay conferences were very well organized, and they continue to be very well organized. So we have the physics conferences and the chemistry conferences run every 3 years. So the topic is decided well over 2 years ahead of the conference. A chair is chosen, and then together we choose people who will chair individual sessions and the rapporteurs, and it's a very elaborate procedure that takes about a year of effort to identify the right topic and the right people and to convince them to buy into doing a lot of preparatory work. So that, I mean, you know, we have here at Santa Barbara, the Institute for Theoretical Physics, 12 or so conferences a year. And they're pretty well organized as well. We get people to do a good job and to think about it ahead of time and invite the right people and so on. But nothing compared to the effort we put into the Solvay conferences. I like to say that, you know, to achieve true spontaneity, a lot of organization is required.
That's true. But you happen to be involved first as a participant or directly as a chair?
No, I was a participant. Well, there was a period during the Prigogine era where he would run conferences elsewhere, and I participated in one of those. By the time I came along, the Solvay conferences weren't that great anymore. They went through a period of rather neglect, but there was one that I did attend. It was held in Austin. I think Prigogine was also an adjunct professor at Austin. And anyway, so there was a Solvay conference that I attended there, which wasn't organized in exactly the same way. It was more of a standard-ish conference, but it was a very good conference and a very exciting time. But no, I had never really attended one of the traditional ones in Brussels. We also tried to preserve the Metropole Hotel and the same room, you know, all the trappings that appeal to, I mean, many physicists, not all, care about history of their field, and they all know about the Solvay conferences.
It was the question. Do they know about the...
Yeah, they all know. Not only that, they all... So that's, again, one of the reasons we're able, I think, to have very good, you know, excellent conferences, is that when we invite people, we get a response rate of close to 100%, you know, much, I don't know, this particular one, which was the anniversary one, and very difficult to organize, even more difficult to organize. I think there were only 1 or 2 out of 60 more who couldn't come. Some people are just attracted because of the historic significance, the famous photographs. They want very much to be in one of those photographs. For this conference, maybe it wasn't for this one, I don't think but Steve Weinberg, who had been to a Solvay conference in the 60s, a famous one which was held in 1967, and I invited him back in 2005, it was, I guess, yeah, 2005. Said yes, he'd be glad to come. Well, he doesn't travel very much anymore. Be glad to come because last time he was there in '67, he missed the photograph. He'd gone to visit the Waterloo battlefield, and so and it was quite amazing. In 2005, indeed, we had a photograph. We did it in the Metropole, and cameras weren't as highly developed. The software hadn't been, Photoshop hadn't improved enough, so that it actually took about an hour, and it was hot and sweaty, and we all sort of stood there and arranged everything. Very good job, but I was impressed at how willing people were to suffer through the process to be in that photograph. Now, photographs are also excellent, but they take 5 minutes.
Yes,
And then you can Photoshop.
Speaking of the photograph, did you know that the 1911 original one, the first one, and the Solvay wasn't there, huh? And so there's been a lot of, which is impressive because
well, they pasted it.
Yes, exactly.
So if you look, you can see.
Yes, he's in the table in a way.
Not only that, his head is a little too big.
Yeah, exactly. But it's an interesting story.
So I have another. There's something else you might notice in the photographs, which I've used in some of my talks. If you look, the first photograph in 1911, Einstein is standing there on the side, and he's holding, his hand is like this. And in 1927, he's sitting already. And also, if you look, his hand is like this. And in fact, there was a story someplace I saw on the internet that he was making a Buddhist sign. But actually, since I'm a cigar smoker, I'm pretty sure that he was holding a little cigar.
And I know the picture so well that I think you should take a look at it next time. That Walter Nernst, on the opposite side, on the left, the same little sign with, I guess, also a cigarette or a cigar.
Yeah,
so I'm pretty sure.
If you look at the 1927 one, I'm standing again, it's like this.
You didn't know that.
And next to him is Langevin with a big Monte Cristo.
These were the times.
They had to hold themselves in a pose for quite a while.
So we've been discussing a lot of history, but as a historian, I'm wondering also, let's say for the new generations of physicists, and say the elite physicists, is it still interesting to go to this kind of small selected conference?
Absolutely.
And not to...
Absolutely. So there are two things about it. One is the high quality, the selection, the preparation, the work that the rapporteurs are supposed to put in, and the discussion is not the usual way conferences are held. It's not how, of course it's not like it used to be, where there were very few conferences. In fact, extremely few international conferences. The Solvay conference in physics, I think, was one of the first, if not the first, in physics to have an international conference just devoted to theoretical physics, or the burning issues at the frontiers of physics. That was really unusual. Nowadays it's common. I mean, we travel a lot of good meetings. They're more random or haphazard because people, since there's so many, people don't invest the same amount of work and preparation to make them truly excellent. But communication now is so easy and so widespread, and papers zip around the world at the speed of light, and are immediately available to everybody. And email, Skype, telephone, jet planes. So doesn't stand out in the same important way that it did in there. And that'll admit history doesn't repeat itself exactly. So, but it's very special, and it's a special setting with all this tradition and effort that goes into making them good. So my emphasis was on the quality. The only way to keep up that tradition is to have things that stand out because of the quality of the participants, and that is easier if you make it highly selective, as everybody wants to come. It's very circular. And if you put a lot of preparation into it so that it's really interesting. The participants are expected. It's a 2.5-day 3-day conference are expected to be there all the time and not. Usually in conferences, we try very hard to avoid that here as well, but people wander in, wander out, have their are looking at their email or the internet. You wander into one of our lectures here. People invariably are checking out other things. They're communicating with the rest of the world. That doesn't happen at these whole-day conferences. Partly because we're kind of firm, and we can get away with it because it's special. So everybody's supposed, we don't really allow. We would stop anybody from checking their email during this talk. It's quite apparent also in this geometrical setting. So really sit around in a circle and see everybody else.
What was it your role as a chair to do this kind of discipline, or was it more to nurture the discussion and to
it was to nurture the discussion, but you need some of that discipline to do that. People find it harder and harder to concentrate and not check their email or whatever every few minutes, or get bored and wander, let their mind wander to something else. So these are really quite special in that respect, and they're intended not to be boring at all. And so a lot of thought is going into making sure ahead of time. So it takes. So we have an upcoming conference, which is rather novel, on the physics of living matter, on biology and physics, and theoretical quantitative biology, which is a bit of a stretch, and that should be exciting. But a lot of work is required on behalf of, maybe 10 people ahead of the conference. The chair and the chairs of individual sessions and the rapporteurs, all, and then I try to make sure that everyone has it well prepared ahead of time, a few months before the conference, so that there's time to circulate some of the drafts and get, in the humanities this is done all the time. You actually prepare papers, right? We don't have that tradition. People go to a normal conference and they give usually some variant of the talk they gave a month ago, some other conference, slightly updated maybe, and nothing written is prepared ahead of time. And they just speak from their PowerPoint. So here, we haven't gone to the stage of the humanities, and that's probably good, because there, I know my wife, my eldest daughter's an historian, so I've heard her talk, and she's essentially reading a paper. The last time I heard her give a talk here, it was with a PowerPoint, and it sounded less prepared, which is I prefer, but we can actually, with pressure, this is a special thing, this tradition, get people to think it through ahead of time, and that it does improve.
In terms of content, do physicists come to Solve Conference and present like finished research projects, or more like testing cases, work in progress kind of stuff, or? Well,
we're always talking about work in progress, but now with the way we publish papers, people tend to put things out very quickly. As soon as a substantial portion of an idea is developed, it'll be put out. And publication might occur a year later somewhere, but nobody cares, except when it comes around to job applications or something. So it's a big issue, future of scientific publication. But we read papers on the archive, which are immediately posted and available to everyone in the world. So it's very hard to really come up, for there to be surprising results at a conference like that. But that's not the idea. It wasn't the case in 1927 either. There were things that were discussed that hadn't yet been published. But it really was, a dialogue about some of the things people didn't understand or thought they understood and others about the argument. But, but as I said, to have a well-structured discussion of that type, it needs to be structured. It can't just be, it has to be spontaneous. It has to reflect people's views and react to other people's views and back and forth. But that has to be in the right setting and with the right direction, and so we try to make sure that some people are very shy, for example, and have a lot to contribute, but it's hard to get them to speak up.
But for instance, then the amount of, for instance, research, really new research that you've discovered there is quite scarce because of the instant, immediate publication.
Anywhere nowadays.
Anywhere.
So you don't go to conferences to get the latest.
Yeah.
You get it anyway. However, you go to understand it and to be able to question and argue, and or delve in more deeply into important results. So, for example, the other thing about the Selfie conferences, which is special, at least in the ones I know about, is to some extent the breadth. So the best conferences that I go to, other than the Selfie conferences, are highly specialized, and these are much broader. And so this one, which we put an enormous amount of work into, which was a celebratory conference, covered all of quantum physics, which is most of physics. And that is pretty unusual, to get sort of a selection of the best people in areas which rarely communicate with each other. So they're all physics, but physics is an enormous enterprise, and that was a very special effort. Same thing in biology we're doing in October. So we're studying, that is focused on, in a sense, quantitative biology or physical biology. But it's still biology, and biology is an even more enormous field. Lots of different subspecialties which don't talk to each other at all, especially about sort of deep fundamental questions. And so that was an enormous challenge, just to figure out what we'll leave out and what possibly could be put together, and will it work? So objections to that kind of meeting, so many people will, it'll be just amateur, it should be sort of at the level of public lectures, it's not worth my while to go to this kind of, and so we've tried to argue that to make it worth your while, even that you can learn something that is relevant to your own research, your own ideas, from adjacent fields, even though they're not directly. And the level can be such that it is not trivial or too lowbrow, even if you're talking to people who are you know. But we had to leave out, we left out neuroscience, for example. You know, neuroscience annual meeting attracts 40,000 or 70,000 people. That's just, and there's a lot of quantitative modeling and physicists coming from physics who think about how the brain works and so on. It's an enormous field, but we just couldn't come, not enough room. But even the area, so we have, you know, a typical Solvay conference, we have 5 separate sessions, half a day each. And these are 5 enormous fields in biology. So they won't be all experts in each other field. But the whole point is to try to discuss common themes. Now, that's hard, very hard to do in a meaningful way. I think we're pretty successful in doing it, but it's certainly very unique. Nobody else tries to do this. I tried to do this one time here. We had a celebration of the Kavli Institute, 2004, 20 years, 25 years. But, and we tried to have a conference about all of physics. But that's very rarely done. And to some extent, that's what we try to do at the Solvay conferences. So this celebratory one was all of quantum physics. In some sense, the next one is all of biology, although we clearly can't do that. A previous one was, that I chaired, was on space and time. So it was from general relativity to quantum gravity to string theory and emergent space, you know, a whole bunch of, again, different communities that rarely, they might hear each other's talks, but rarely get together at a high-level conference of this type. And that people enjoy, most people.
Last question concerning, once again, your role as a chair, because I'm fascinated by the figure of Hendrik Lorentz, Langevin after him, who were really important chair, and I think it's a major part of the success of these conferences. I know that it requires a lot of work, preparatory work, but how do you prepare really, instead of not only on the I would say research part, but also mostly the human part, because I guess there are many cultures coming there, lots of nationalities. How can, you know, this Solvay spirit try to fuse in there?
Yeah, well, the tradition helps, you know. This overlay of being a well-endowed, of pleasant, nice hotel, Solvay's, meeting with the king in the past, or prince. So all of those add a bit of, make it easier. You know? But then it's mostly the good science then. So these are communities, by and large, that know each other. I mean, they're friends, colleagues. So it's small-ish, it's not enormous. So everybody gets to meet maybe a third of the people they'll know well. And then they get to meet new, exciting people from a neighboring field and in a wonderful environment. And people in Brussels do this very well. There's the whole, you know, organization of the, which is done very well. Brussels is a nice city. The metropole is a nice place to meet in the center of the city. So very enjoyable. And after this revival, this reputation, you know, is not just the reputation of 100 years ago, but people have come to one of these and like to come back or have heard about it. The biggest problem, we've had problems in the past of having to agree on, you know, a limited number of invitations. But it hasn't really been a problem. I mean, the attitude of Mark and of the Solvay family of not having, in a sense, politics or nationalism or involved has made it, has definitely helped. And the family has been extraordinarily helpful. I started on this at a difficult period where it wasn't at all certain, but they were willing to take the risk of trying to make it work and see how it goes. And Mark has done just a spectacular job in the conferences and the institute, and so the family now, especially with Jean-Marie, is been incredibly supportive. So I think it's going well, and it's a fun thing to do. It was not that difficult for me in a sense because this institute does that for a living. So when I was director of this institute, I got in the habit of organizing conferences and programs and learning what works, what doesn't, and also being exposed to all the physics. So it was very propitious, good timing for me, and I've enjoyed it enormously.